The decision landed with the force of a royal earthquake. Behind closed doors, a final confirmation placed Princess Charlotte alone at the center of one of Diana's most emotionally charged legacies. And Meghan was nowhere in the succession. What looked like a simple question of jewels suddenly became something far more personal: inheritance, belonging, memory, and rejection. And when Meghan learned exactly whose name had been written into that future, her reaction changed the atmosphere instantly. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan did not speak. She stood alone with the confirmation, read Charlotte's name, lowered the page, then lifted it again, as if the words might change. They did not. The document stated that Princess Charlotte had been formally confirmed as the sole future heir to Diana's private jewel vault, excluding Meghan and every other possible claimant from inheriting the collection as a whole. The wording carried more weight than money. Diana's private jewel vault meant the protected collection of personal pieces tied to her life, public identity, motherhood, and family history. This was not simply a box of diamonds waiting to be divided. It was being treated as one legacy, preserved intact for the next generation, making Charlotte's position far more powerful than an ordinary inheritance. William felt something different when he read the confirmation. Relief settled over him. For the prince, Charlotte's future role created a line between the mother he lost and the daughter now growing inside the royal family. He saw the decision as protection, a way to stop Diana's most personal pieces from becoming scattered across a wounded family. Then came the clause that changed everything. Charlotte was not being promised a few selected jewels. She was being named the designated custodian, meaning the person trusted to protect the entire collection once the inheritance conditions were met. That single word turned possession into responsibility, but it also closed the door on anyone hoping the vault might be divided. Meghan noticed something else. The wording had been settled before she had any chance to challenge it. Someone had expected resistance and made sure the structure would be difficult to reopen. She set the page down again, more slowly, because the real wound was no longer only what Charlotte would receive. It was why Meghan had ever believed Diana's legacy might still pass through her own side of the family at all. And to understand why those few words cut so deeply, the story had to move beyond the jewels and into the two very different women whose futures had suddenly collided around Diana's name. Charlotte did not ask to become the center of this battle. Meghan did not expect to discover that she had been pushed completely outside it. Yet one royal child and one estranged duchess now stood on opposite sides of Diana's legacy, without ever confronting each other directly. For Charlotte, the inheritance carried the weight of a grandmother she never knew. For Meghan, it seemed to confirm something far colder. That separation from the monarchy had become permanent. William understood why the decision felt bigger than jewelry. Charlotte was Diana's granddaughter through him, and that blood connection gave the collection a meaning no price could measure. When he spoke with his daughter, he chose his words carefully. He told her that the pieces were not simply things to wear one day. They carried stories, memories, and responsibility. The young princess listened quietly, sensing from his tone that this was not a normal family conversation. Meghan felt the same weight from the opposite side. Through Harry and their children, she believed Diana's emotional legacy belonged to both of her sons, and therefore could never be treated as though it belonged only to William's branch. That was why Charlotte's designation hurt so sharply. It seemed to her like another boundary had been drawn around Archie and Lilibet, separating them from a history that still belonged to their father. Harry knew the conversation was coming before she asked the question. He sat opposite Meghan as she pressed him on whether he already knew Charlotte had been under consideration. For several seconds, he looked away. That pause changed the room. When he finally admitted that he had known discussions were moving in that direction, she heard the hesitation before she heard the answer. Meghan's disappointment deepened because silence now felt like secrecy. Harry tried to explain that the arrangement was not meant to erase their children, but his words landed badly. The custodial principle behind Charlotte's inheritance meant the most significant pieces had to remain together rather than being divided among different family branches. A custodian, in this context, meant the person trusted to preserve the collection as one protected legacy, rather than treat it as separate personal gifts. William had supported that principle because he believed fragmentation would create endless conflict. Harry understood the logic, but Meghan heard something else: permanence. The decision was not just choosing Charlotte, it was closing future routes to the vault. And that principle had not appeared by accident. It had been born from one specific private incident that convinced William Diana's collection could no longer be left open to competing expectations. The silence between Harry and Meghan now pointed backward to that moment, the encounter that turned tension into an irreversible decision. Every family rupture has one moment that later feels inevitable. In this story, it came during a private Windsor meeting when a seemingly simple request concerning one of Diana's most recognizable pieces changed the entire conversation. Nothing was shouted, no public statement followed. But William left that encounter convinced that his mother's collection needed stronger protection, while Harry left knowing a line had quietly been drawn. Months later, Charlotte's name would appear at the end of that line. William had already begun thinking differently about the collection before that meeting. For years, Diana's surviving pieces had existed through family understanding, historical association, and carefully controlled access, rather than one simple rule governing everything together. He increasingly saw them as a connected archive of his mother's life, not separate objects waiting to be divided. An archive, in this sense, meant a protected group of personal items preserved together because their meaning came from the story they told as a whole. Harry felt the danger in that thinking immediately. He believed distance from royal duties should never weaken Archie and Lilibet's emotional connection to their grandmother, and any system favoring William's branch felt like a judgment on his own family. The prince understood his brother's anger, but he feared something different: that every disagreement over Diana would eventually turn her possessions into bargaining pieces inside a much larger family war. Then came the request that changed everything. During the private Windsor meeting, Harry raised Meghan's wish for future access to Diana's sapphire and diamond choker for a major family appearance. William did not hesitate for long. He refused, and told his brother that no significant piece would leave the protected collection until a permanent inheritance structure had been settled. Harry's frustration rose instantly. He argued that Meghan's request was about family connection, not ownership, and that shutting the door only deepened the sense that Diana's memory was being controlled by one side. William pushed back just as firmly. To him, temporary access without clear rules risked creating expectations that would become almost impossible to reverse later. The room changed after that. When Harry finally left, the prince remained behind with the jewel inventory folder still open before him. He closed it, placed both hands flat on the table, and gave his advisor one instruction: keep it together. Those words carried more weight than they seemed to. They were no longer about one necklace. They were about the future of the entire collection. William acted immediately afterward. He requested a formal inventory and asked that future custodianship, the legal responsibility for protecting and preserving the collection, be clarified in writing. From that moment, Charlotte's eventual position stopped being a distant possibility and began moving toward structure. But William was not the only person with the power to secure it. Those 3 words had turned family tension into strategy. And when Meghan discovered who had helped make that strategy final, restraint would finally give way to confrontation. The confrontation was never really about diamonds. Once Meghan and Harry understood that Charlotte's future claim had been deliberately protected, years of resentment rushed into the same room. Diana's memory, William's authority, Harry's isolation, and Meghan's belief that her children were being erased from royal history collided at once. And when William refused to reopen the arrangement, the exchange stopped sounding like a disagreement over inheritance and began sounding like a family finally admitting what had broken. Harry had insisted on speaking directly with his brother because Meghan no longer trusted messages passed through secretaries or advisors. She joined the conversation for one reason: Archie and Lilibet. To her, Charlotte's position did not simply decide who would inherit a protected collection. It appeared to place one branch of Diana's family closer to her memory while pushing the other further away. Meghan spoke first and did not soften the point. She told William that naming Charlotte as sole heir made Harry's children look less connected to their grandmother simply because they were being raised outside the working royal structure. William listened, then answered with the same controlled tone he had used before. He said the decision was about preservation, not punishment. But that calmness only sharpened her frustration, because she heard something colder behind it: finality. William finally explained what had shaped the choice. The collection needed one future custodian, meaning one person responsible for keeping its most important pieces protected together, instead of allowing them to be divided between descendants. Charlotte had been selected because the arrangement was designed around continuity, not access for individual family branches. That was when the room broke open. Meghan pushed her chair back as William said the vault will remain intact. Harry reached toward her, but she remained standing. The prince stayed seated and refused to change the wording. For Meghan, that sentence sounded less like preservation and more like a door closing permanently on her children. Harry turned back to his brother and asked the question that had been hanging over everything: could the decision still be changed? William paused before answering. Then he made clear that reopening the arrangement required authority beyond his own position. He had helped shape and defend it, but he was not the final power standing behind it. Meghan left believing William had engineered the entire outcome. Harry knew the truth was more complicated. Once they were alone, he explained that the decisive protection had come from someone above their personal dispute, someone whose approval transformed family preference into something far harder to challenge. That changed everything. Meghan had entered believing she was confronting the man who made the decision. She left, discovering that William had merely secured a decision backed by the crown itself. That required the authority of the monarch. Behind the family drama sat a colder question: who had the power to decide whether Diana's collection remained a private inheritance, a divided family possession, or a protected royal legacy? When Charles reviewed the final arrangement, he faced an impossible emotional balance between two sons already divided and a granddaughter who had become the chosen guardian of their mother's memory. Charles understood exactly what his approval would mean. The arrangement had now moved beyond family preference and into a formal custodial structure, a system that defined who would protect the collection and under what limits. Charlotte would inherit that responsibility in time, while key restrictions would stop the most significant pieces from being broken apart, sold, or permanently moved outside the protected group. The king read every page with Harry in his mind. Supporting William would almost certainly feel like another rejection to his younger son, especially after years of distance had already hardened small disagreements into deeper wounds. Yet refusing the arrangement carried another risk. Without one clear structure, Diana's jewels could become a permanent source of conflict, with every future request reopening the same argument. Charles slowed when he reached Diana's name. For a moment, the document stopped feeling administrative. These were possessions, connected to a woman whose life had already shaped both of his sons in painful, very different ways. Now, years later, those same objects were threatening to become another dividing line between them. The silence stretched. Charles reached the final page, removed his glasses, and rested them beside the document. He sat without speaking. Then he picked up the pen. His signature did not simply acknowledge William's plan. It gave Charlotte's position the royal authority Meghan had hoped might still be challenged. Another provision made the decision even more significant. Charlotte would not inherit the collection as unrestricted personal property. She would inherit obligations with it. The young princess would become guardian of the legacy, responsible for protecting the pieces as a connected part of Diana's history, rather than treating them as ordinary possessions. William received the approval with quiet certainty, but he also understood the cost. Harry would see the king's signature as proof that the family had closed ranks. Meghan would see it as confirmation that the path back into this part of Diana's legacy had narrowed almost completely. And once that approval reached them, the fight would change. It was no longer about stopping the decision before it became final. It was about surviving what that finality seemed to say about their place in the family. The signature had ended the argument on paper, but inside two separated households, its emotional consequences were only beginning. A battle can sometimes be easier to survive than a verdict. As long as Meghan believed the inheritance could be challenged, anger gave her something to hold on to. Once Charles's approval became known, that anger collapsed into something quieter. Harry could no longer promise that another conversation would change anything. Charlotte's place was secured, the vault was protected, and Meghan was forced to confront the possibility that the deepest wound was not losing access to Diana's jewels, but losing inclusion altogether. Harry received confirmation privately before the wider royal household was told the arrangement had been finalized. He understood at once what it meant. With William and the king now supporting the same structure, no routine family appeal remained. An appeal, in this context, meant a formal attempt to reopen or challenge a settled decision. This time, there was nowhere obvious left to take the argument. Meghan watched his face before he even finished explaining. Then she asked the question he had been dreading. Had he really fought hard enough for their children? Harry stiffened. He had spent months trying to hold two loyalties at once, protecting his family while still carrying the grief attached to his mother. Now he was being asked to defend himself at the exact moment he felt he had already lost. Harry finally admitted what Meghan had not expected to hear. Every challenge connected to Diana had widened the distance between him and William. Every attempt to push against another boundary had made the next conversation colder. He was tired of turning his mother's memory into the ground on which he and his brother fought. That confession changed her expression. Meghan realized he had known for some time that Charles was leaning toward approval. He had not told her because he still hoped the final decision might shift. The silence that followed was worse than anger. She understood that Harry had been carrying the possibility of defeat alone while trying to protect her from it. Meghan did not explode. That was what made the moment heavier. She removed a piece of jewelry she had been wearing, placed it quietly beside the confirmation, and told Harry she did not want to discuss the vault again that night. Then she stepped away from the conversation entirely. Harry remained where he was, knowing the conflict had moved somewhere more dangerous. It was no longer about convincing William or reopening Charles's approval. It was about whether he and Meghan could accept something they hated without allowing it to consume everything around them. For the first time, fighting the palace was no longer the urgent choice. The urgent choice was whether Harry could follow Meghan not as a prince defending a claim, but as a husband trying to stop Diana's legacy from dividing their own family too. The turning point did not happen before courtiers, lawyers, or cameras. It happened with only Harry and Meghan in the room. No palace official could absorb the anger for them. No statement could reframe what had happened. Harry finally stopped arguing about who deserved which jewel and told Meghan what he had been avoiding. Diana's memory could not be measured by possession. If they continued treating Charlotte's inheritance as a verdict on their children's worth, the jewels would claim something far more valuable than any vault contained. Harry approached her only after the first shock had faded. This time there were no advisors, no palace channels, and no one else to blame for how the conversation unfolded. He sat beside Meghan, rather than across from her, and took the official confirmation from the table. The document had become a symbol of everything they feared losing. But he now wanted to separate two things they had allowed to become tangled together: Charlotte's custodianship of the jewels, and Archie and Lilibet's emotional connection to Diana. Meghan finally said what had been underneath her anger from the beginning. She had not only seen Charlotte's inheritance as a decision about property, she had seen it as proof that her children would always stand outside the family story, close enough to carry Diana's blood, but too distant to inherit the symbols attached to her life. That belief had made every clause feel personal. Harry did not dismiss that pain. Instead, he admitted something harder. He had helped reinforce it. Every time a disagreement with William became a fight about belonging, every time another royal boundary was treated as evidence of rejection, he had made it easier for Meghan to believe that one decision could define their children's place forever. Then he made the choice she had not expected. Harry told Meghan he would not launch another challenge to Charlotte's designation. He would not turn the vault into another battlefield. The decision shocked her because she had expected resistance to continue until every possible route had been exhausted. Meghan stayed quiet as he folded the confirmation closed. Harry told her they would not allow a jewel inventory to define Archie or Lilibet. Diana had left more than diamonds behind. There were stories, photographs, memories, private moments, and the emotional inheritance only her son could pass to his own children. Something shifted after that. Meghan did not suddenly celebrate the decision, but she stopped treating Charlotte's inheritance as proof that her family had been erased. The jewels could go one way, while memory traveled another. Harry placed the document aside. For the first time, the conflict loosened its grip inside the room. But outside it, secrecy was about to disappear completely, and Charlotte's name was on the verge of becoming the center of a global argument over what Diana's legacy truly meant. By morning, what had been whispered behind palace doors belonged to everyone. Charlotte's name was suddenly attached not merely to a royal inheritance, but to Diana herself. Broadcasters debated symbolism. Commentators argued over bloodlines and belonging. Crowds gathered where Diana's memory still carried emotional force. Yet behind the headlines stood an 11-letter name belonging to a young princess who had never asked to become the answer to a family dispute. The private vault had become a public referendum on legacy. William saw the coverage before Charlotte did, and his reaction was immediate. The palace confirmation described her future role as custodianship and preservation, meaning she would be responsible for protecting the collection rather than simply treating it as personal property. That distinction mattered because the arrangement was meant to keep Diana's most important pieces together for another generation, not turn them into prizes in a family contest. The prince opened the morning papers and stopped at one front page. A full-page image of Diana wearing one of her iconic jewels appeared beside a smaller photograph of Charlotte, beneath the stark headline, "Diana's Legacy Passes to Charlotte." Outside Kensington Palace, visitors paused with copies of the newspaper near tributes connected to the late princess, turning one family decision into a public symbol within hours. William folded the page inward until his daughter's photograph disappeared. He quietly asked that Charlotte be kept away from the coverage. What frustrated him most was not criticism of the arrangement. It was seeing adult tensions wrapped around a child who had never asked to inherit anyone's conflict. Harry reacted differently. After his private conversation with Meghan, he watched the debate with a calm that would have seemed impossible days earlier. Commentators focused heavily on Archie and Lilibet being outside the jewel arrangement, but he refused to answer through another public fight. Meghan understood the choice. Restarting the argument now would only turn Diana's memory into another weapon. Then the public discussion shifted. Details of Charlotte's restrictions became widely discussed, revealing that she would not have unlimited freedom to sell, divide, or permanently transfer the collection. Preserving the jewels as part of Diana's story was built into the inheritance itself. The word heir suddenly sounded less like privilege and more like responsibility. Harry noticed that change too. What had once looked like a victory for William's branch began to appear more complicated. Charlotte was receiving the collection, but she was also receiving its weight. And when the noise finally began to fade, one question remained beneath every headline. Not who had won, but what Diana's legacy was actually worth. The world had turned inheritance into competition. The final verdict would come from recognizing that her memory had never been small enough to fit inside a vault. In the end, the document does not change. Charlotte remains the sole future custodian of Diana's protected jewel collection. Meghan does not receive the inheritance she once believed might remain open to Harry's side of the family. William does not reverse course. Charles does not withdraw his approval. Yet the final meaning of the moment becomes clearer only when the struggle over possession stops. Because the jewels can pass to one granddaughter, while Diana's emotional legacy still belongs to every child shaped by her absence. William finally accepts the weight of what he has protected. The arrangement keeps the jewel vault intact, meaning the collection stays together under one future custodian, instead of being divided across different family branches. To the prince, that matters, because these pieces carry far more than financial value. They are tied to his mother's private history, public identity, and the painful memory of a family that has spent years trying to understand what she left behind. Meghan reaches a different kind of acceptance. She no longer treats Charlotte's inheritance as proof that Archie and Lilibet have been erased from Diana's story. The decision still hurts, but Harry carries something no document can redistribute: memories of his mother as a person, not an icon. Those memories belong to him, and through him, they can still belong to his children. Harry understands that responsibility now. His daughter does not need possession of the vault to inherit stories about her grandmother. His son does not need a jewel to understand where he came from. The prince realizes that preserving those memories is something no palace ruling can do for him. That responsibility is his. Charlotte, meanwhile, inherits more than privilege. One day, she will carry the burden of objects surrounded by grief, history, fascination, and expectation. Custodianship does not simply give her access. It makes her responsible for protecting what those pieces represent. William eventually places the finalized inventory back into its protective case. He knows keeping the jewels together cannot repair everything between him and Harry. But he also knows reconciliation should not require destroying the decision he believes protects their mother's legacy. Elsewhere, Harry shows his children an old photograph of Diana. There are no jewels in the image. She is simply laughing. That moment says more than the arguments ever did. Charlotte receives the jewel vault. Meghan accepts the outcome. Harry chooses memory over another confrontation. William keeps the collection intact. And the final message is clear. Objects may have one custodian, but Diana's place within the family belongs to no single person. The vault is closed, the decision is settled, and the family is left with the only inheritance that could never be locked away: the memory of the woman who connected them all. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.